The drive-thru worker leaned out the window and said, "Man, there's something in your back seat. Drive to the police station now." I spun around so fast my neck popped. A woman was crammed behind my driver's seat, unconscious, zip ties around her wrists, duct tape over her mouth. Blood matted her blonde hair where someone had hit her hard enough to knock her out, but not kill her. What the fuck? I grabbed my phone to call 911, but the drive-thru worker shook his head urgently. "Don't call the cops yet. I'm Detective Marcus Kane, undercover narcotics. That woman is federal witness Jessica Lawson. Someone just tried to kidnap her from the coffee shop while you were inside using the restroom." My hands were shaking as I stared at the unconscious woman. "How did she get in my car?" "Because whoever grabbed her used your vehicle as a hiding spot while they figured out their next move. I knocked out the kidnapper and stuffed him in the trunk of that blue sedan over there, but his backup team is probably on their way." Detective Kane vaulted through the drive-thru window into my passenger seat with military precision. He was maybe 40, built like someone who spent serious time in the gym, with scars on his hands that suggested he'd seen real violence. "Drive toward downtown," he commanded, checking his watch. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they realize their operation went sideways and start looking for their missing package." "What missing package?" I demanded, though I was already putting the car in drive. Every instinct screamed at me to get away from this nightmare that had somehow invaded my Tuesday night coffee run. Kane pulled out a badge that looked legitimate and a gun that definitely was. Jessica Lawson was scheduled to testify tomorrow morning against Vincent Romano, head of the biggest heroin distribution network on the East Coast. Romano's people grabbed her tonight to prevent her testimony. The woman in my back seat stirred, groaning softly as consciousness began returning. Through the rearview mirror, I could see her eyes flutter open, confusion and terror replacing the blankness of unconsciousness. "Where am I?" Jessica's voice was muffled by the tape, but her panic was clear. "Who are you people? What do you want with me?" Kane turned in his seat to face her, his expression professional but reassuring. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Kane, Metro PD. You were kidnapped from Brew and Bean Coffee Shop about 20 minutes ago. We're taking you somewhere safe until we can arrange federal protection." Jessica struggled against her restraints, her fear escalating as she processed the situation. "The coffee shop? I was supposed to meet my handler there, Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI Witness Protection Program. Where is she?" Kane's expression darkened. "Agent Collins is dead. Shot execution style in the coffee shop parking lot while you were inside. Her murder was the distraction that allowed Romano's team to grab you without witnesses." I felt sick listening to this conversation while navigating through traffic that suddenly seemed filled with potential threats. Every car could be following us. Every driver could be working for people who murdered federal agents to prevent testimony. "Why is she in my car?" I asked, though part of me was afraid to know the answer. "Why didn't they use their own vehicle for the kidnapping?" "Because your car wasn't supposed to be part of the operation," Kane replied, while scanning surrounding traffic for surveillance. "You were just a random customer who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But now you're involved whether you like it or not." Jessica was working her hands free from the zip ties, her movements suggesting experience with restraints that made me wonder what kind of life had led her to federal witness protection. "Detective Kane, how do I know you're really police? How do I know you're not working for Romano?" Kane showed her his badge and identification while keeping his weapon ready for immediate use. "Because if I was working for Romano, you'd already be dead instead of sitting here asking questions. Ma'am, we need to get you to federal authorities who can provide real protection." "The federal authorities are compromised," Jessica said with bitter certainty. "Agent Collins told me that Romano has people inside the FBI, the DEA, probably local police departments too. That's why they moved the testimony to tomorrow instead of next week." Kane's radio crackled with urgent communications from other units. "All units be advised. Federal Agent Sarah Collins found deceased at Brew and Bean Coffee Shop, 1247 Hamilton Street. Suspect vehicle is a dark blue sedan, license plate unknown. Federal witness Jessica Lawson is missing and presumed kidnapped. They're already broadcasting your disappearance," Kane told Jessica, while changing our route toward what appeared to be a more defensible location. "Which means Romano's people are monitoring police communications and know exactly where to look for you." Through the passenger window, I could see a dark blue sedan matching the description from Kane's radio, pacing us 3 lanes over with occupants who were paying too much attention to our vehicle. Professional surveillance that confirmed Jessica's kidnapping was part of a larger operation. "Kane, there's a blue sedan that's been following us for the past 5 blocks, I said, trying to keep my voice steady while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Should we try to lose them, or find somewhere public with lots of witnesses?" "Neither," Kane replied, pulling out his phone to make a call. "We're going to lead them exactly where we want them to go, then eliminate the threat permanently." The call connected to someone Kane addressed as Lieutenant Morrison. "This is Kane. I've got the Romano witness and 3 hostiles in pursuit, requesting tactical backup at the old warehouse district, Building 7, in 15 minutes. Jessica was listening to this coordination with growing alarm. "Detective Kane, I don't want to be bait in some police operation. I just want to survive long enough to testify against Romano tomorrow morning." "Ma'am, the only way you survive until tomorrow is if we eliminate the people hunting you tonight," Kane replied with professional certainty. "Romano has unlimited resources and connections throughout law enforcement. Running and hiding won't work. I drove toward the warehouse district while watching the blue sedan maintain its distance, neither closing for attack nor falling back to avoid detection. Professional surveillance that suggested the occupants were confident in their ability to handle whatever confrontation was coming. The warehouse district was exactly what it sounded like. Rows of abandoned industrial buildings in various states of decay, perfect location for activities that required privacy and didn't generate noise complaints from neighbors. Building 7 was a 5-story structure that looked like it had been empty for years, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls that suggested frequent use by people who needed to avoid official attention. But the building also had multiple access points and defensive positions that would favor law enforcement in a tactical situation. Kane, how do we know your backup is coming? I asked, while parking behind the building where our vehicle would be concealed from street view. How do we know this isn't a trap where we get eliminated along with the people following us? Kane checked his weapon and ammunition, while Jessica freed herself completely from the remaining restraints. Because if this was a trap, I would have driven you somewhere with no escape routes and no tactical advantages. This building has everything we need to defend ourselves. Jessica was studying the building with professional attention. That seemed odd for someone who was supposedly just a federal witness. Detective Kane, this building isn't abandoned. Someone's been using it recently. Fresh tire tracks, recent cigarette butts, surveillance cameras that are functional rather than decorative. Kane followed her gaze and saw what she meant. Signs of regular occupancy that suggested Building 7 was someone's operational base rather than a randomly chosen tactical position. We weren't walking into neutral territory. Change of plans, Kane said immediately, moving toward the car. This location is compromised. We find somewhere else to make our stand. But it was too late. The blue sedan had arrived along with 2 additional vehicles, disgorging armed figures who moved with military coordination to surround the building before we could escape. Professional tactics that suggested extensive training and unlimited resources. Kane, we're surrounded, I said, while counting hostile positions through different windows. At least 8 people with automatic weapons, positioning themselves to cover all exits from the building. Jessica grabbed Kane's radio and started scanning frequencies until she found communications from the tactical team outside. They're not trying to rescue me, she said with growing horror. They're planning to eliminate all 3 of us and make it look like a drug deal gone wrong. Kane was studying the tactical positions with professional assessment of our chances, which appeared to be approximately 0 against superior numbers and firepower. Jessica, what aren't you telling me about your witness testimony? What's so important that Romano would risk murdering a federal agent and 2 civilians to prevent it? I'm not just testifying about Romano's heroin operation, Jessica replied, while checking the building for defensive positions and potential weapons. I have evidence that he's been laundering money for international terrorist organizations, using drug profits to fund operations against American targets. The revelation recontextualized everything about the situation. This wasn't just about preventing drug trafficking testimony. It was about protecting terrorist financing operations that could threaten national security on a scale far beyond local law enforcement. What kind of evidence? I asked, while moving toward the back of the building where thick concrete walls might provide better protection from automatic weapons fire. Jessica pulled out a device that looked like a modified smartphone from a hidden pocket in her jacket. Financial records, communication intercepts, transportation manifests, everything needed to prove that Romano's network has been moving money and personnel for Al-Qaeda-affiliated groups for the past 3 years. Kane's expression showed recognition that suggested he'd suspected something beyond simple drug trafficking. Jessica, are you really a federal witness? Or are you a federal agent conducting an undercover investigation into terrorist financing? I'm DEA agent Jessica Lawson, 18 months deep cover in Romano's organization, she replied, while activating what appeared to be emergency communication equipment. Tonight's kidnapping was supposed to eliminate me before I could deliver evidence to Federal Terrorism Task Force tomorrow morning. The tactical team outside was preparing for final assault, coordinating through radio communications that suggested they planned to eliminate all witnesses and destroy the building to conceal evidence of their operation. Agent Lawson, can your emergency equipment reach federal backup? Kane asked while positioning himself at a window that provided fields of fire toward hostile positions. Unknown, Jessica replied while working with communication devices. The equipment is designed to penetrate standard communication jamming, but Romano's people have military-grade countermeasures that might block federal frequencies. That's when I realized something about Kane that had been bothering me since this started. Detective Kane, how did you know Jessica was a federal witness before she told you? How did you know about Romano's operation and Agent Collins's murder? Kane's hesitation lasted just long enough to feel significant. Because I've been investigating Romano's network for 8 months as part of a joint task force between Metro PD and federal agencies. Agent Collins was my primary contact. Then why are we trapped in a building surrounded by Romano's people, instead of coordinating with your task force for backup and support? Jessica asked, her tone suggesting she'd noticed the same inconsistencies I was seeing. Kane's radio crackled with incoming communication from someone who addressed him as Detective Kane. This is Lieutenant Morrison. What's your status at Building 7? We show multiple hostile contacts converging on your position. Morrison, we need immediate tactical backup, Kane replied. Federal Agent Jessica Lawson is with me, and we're surrounded by at least 8 hostiles with automatic weapons. Negative on tactical backup, Detective, Morrison replied with professional detachment. Building 7 is outside our jurisdiction, and federal agencies haven't authorized local law enforcement involvement in witness protection operations. Jessica and I exchanged glances that confirmed we were both thinking the same thing. Kane's backup wasn't coming because his backup was part of whatever operation was trying to eliminate federal evidence of terrorist financing. Kane, who do you really work for? Jessica demanded, while checking her weapon and scanning for alternative escape routes that probably didn't exist. Kane's expression showed genuine conflict, as if he was struggling between loyalty to his organization and recognition that the situation had become untenable. I work for people who believe that sometimes protecting American interests requires methods that federal agencies don't have the courage to authorize. What does that mean? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. It means Romano's terrorist financing operation was being allowed to continue because it provided intelligence about terrorist activities that we couldn't gather through conventional means, Kane replied, while continuing to monitor hostile positions outside. Jessica's face went pale as the implications became clear. You're telling me that federal agencies have been protecting Romano's money laundering operation because it gave them access to terrorist communications and financial networks? I'm telling you that eliminating Romano's operation would cut off our primary source of intelligence about terrorist activities on American soil, Kane replied. Your evidence would shut down the most valuable counterterrorism asset we've developed in 20 years. The tactical team outside was moving into final assault positions, but their communications suggested they were waiting for specific authorization before beginning elimination operations. Someone was coordinating this from a higher level than local criminal organization. Kane, how many federal agents know about this arrangement with Romano? Jessica asked, while preparing for what appeared to be inevitable confrontation. Enough, Kane replied without providing specific numbers. DEA, FBI, CIA, NSA, probably others. The operation has support at levels that would make your evidence irrelevant even if you survived to present it. I was listening to this conversation while watching armed figures position themselves for assault through multiple building access points. So we're going to die tonight to protect a counterterrorism operation that uses drug trafficking and terrorist financing as intelligence gathering methods? You're going to die tonight because you happened to be in the wrong place when a federal operation reached the point where loose ends needed to be eliminated, Kane corrected with brutal honesty. Jessica activated her emergency communication equipment, broadcasting on frequencies that were designed to reach federal agencies regardless of local interference. This is DEA agent Jessica Lawson, badge number 4821, requesting immediate federal protection and backup at Building 7, Warehouse District. I have evidence of terrorist financing operations and am under attack by corrupted law enforcement personnel. The response came immediately from someone who identified himself as FBI Deputy Director Robert Sterling. Agent Lawson, this is Sterling. Your evidence has been compromised by your extended deep cover assignment. Return to federal protection immediately for psychological evaluation and debriefing. Deputy Director Sterling, I'm being hunted by people claiming to work for counterterrorism operations that are protecting terrorist financing. My evidence is legitimate and needs immediate federal review. Sterling's pause suggested he was coordinating with other agencies. Agent Lawson, your evidence threatens ongoing national security operations that are classified above your clearance level. Surrender the evidence and submit to protective custody immediately. Jessica looked at Kane and me with recognition that federal protection wasn't coming because federal agencies were part of the operation trying to eliminate her evidence. We're on our own, she said, while checking ammunition and preparing for siege warfare. The assault began with flashbang grenades thrown through multiple windows simultaneously, designed to disorient defenders while tactical teams breached from different directions. But the building's concrete construction absorbed much of the explosive force, leaving us functional despite temporary hearing damage. Kane returned fire through windows while Jessica and I moved toward the building's central staircase, which provided access to upper floors and potential escape routes through the roof. The tactical team was professional, but not overwhelming, suggesting they wanted to minimize casualties while eliminating specific targets. How many rounds do you have? Kane asked, while engaging targets that were advancing through the main entrance. 36, Jessica replied, plus emergency equipment that includes smoke grenades and communication jamming devices that might level the playing field. I found a fire axe mounted on the wall and tested its weight, preparing for close combat that seemed increasingly likely as the tactical team advanced floor by floor through the building. Jessica, can you jam their communications while Kane and I hold defensive positions? Already working on it, she replied, while activating equipment that immediately disrupted radio communications between the assault team members. This should buy us maybe 10 minutes before they adapt their tactics. The loss of coordination was immediately obvious as the assault team's movements became less synchronized and more cautious. Without radio communication, they had to rely on visual signals and predetermined tactical plans that were less flexible than real-time coordination. Kane was engaging multiple targets from a defensive position that provided good fields of fire but limited escape options. Jessica, what's your extraction plan if we survive this assault? Get to federal agencies that aren't compromised by the counterterrorism operation, she replied, while providing covering fire for our retreat toward the upper floors. Present evidence to congressional oversight committees or international agencies that can investigate without conflicts of interest. But the tactical team was adapting to the loss of radio communications, using hand signals and coordinated movements that suggested extensive training for exactly these kinds of situations. Professional killers who specialized in eliminating federal agents and witnesses. We reached the third floor as the assault team breached the second floor, their movements systematic and patient rather than rushed. They had time and overwhelming firepower, while we had limited ammunition and no realistic hope of federal backup. Kane, there's something I need to tell you, Jessica said, while we prepared defensive positions around the staircase. The evidence I'm carrying isn't just about Romano's terrorist financing operation. What else? Kane asked, though his attention was focused on hostile movements below us. It's about the federal agents who are protecting the operation. Names, financial records, communication intercepts, everything needed to expose corruption that reaches the highest levels of counterterrorism agencies. Kane's expression showed recognition rather than surprise. Jessica, how many people are you planning to destroy with this evidence? However many are necessary to stop terrorist financing operations that are being protected by American law enforcement, she replied, while checking her remaining ammunition. The assault team had reached our floor and was preparing for final confrontation in the confined space around the staircase, but they were also being cautious, probably because their orders were to recover Jessica's evidence intact rather than simply eliminate all witnesses. Agent Lawson, a voice called from below. This is Special Agent Robert Thompson, FBI Counterterrorism. We're here to provide federal protection and secure the evidence you've gathered during your undercover assignment. Jessica's laugh was bitter and without humor. Special Agent Thompson, if you're here to provide protection, why are your people carrying automatic weapons and breaching the building like a military assault? Because the building contains hostile elements that pose threats to federal witness protection operations, Thompson replied with professional calm. Agent Lawson, surrender the evidence and allow us to extract you safely. Kane was studying the tactical situation with growing concern. Jessica, they're not planning to extract you safely. They're planning to eliminate you and claim you were killed by Romano's people during a rescue operation gone wrong. How do you know that? I asked, while positioning myself for close combat with the fire axe. Because that's exactly what I would do if I needed to eliminate a federal agent while maintaining plausible deniability, Kane replied with professional assessment. Create a scenario where her death serves the narrative rather than exposing the operation. Jessica activated more of her emergency equipment, broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously. This is DEA Agent Jessica Lawson. I'm under attack by federal agents claiming to be conducting protective operations. I have evidence of terrorist financing operations protected by corrupted counterterrorism agencies. My death tonight is not accidental. The broadcast was reaching multiple agencies and oversight committees simultaneously, creating official record that would make Jessica's elimination more complicated from a political perspective. But it also accelerated the timeline for eliminating her before she could present evidence. Agent Lawson, cease unauthorized communications immediately, Thompson ordered from below. You're compromising ongoing national security operations with classified information. I'm exposing national security operations that protect terrorist financing, Jessica replied, while preparing for final confrontation. The American people deserve to know that their counterterrorism agencies are collaborating with the enemies they're supposed to be fighting. The assault came suddenly and with overwhelming force. Tactical teams breaching from multiple directions simultaneously, using smoke grenades and coordinated fire to eliminate our defensive positions. Professional execution designed to minimize their casualties while ensuring our elimination. Kane engaged multiple targets while Jessica and I retreated toward the roof access, which might provide escape routes or at least defensive positions that were harder to assault. But the building was surrounded, and the tactical team had unlimited resources and patience. Jessica, how do we get your evidence to legitimate authorities if we don't survive tonight? I asked, while using the fire axe to clear debris from the roof access. She handed me a device that looked like a modified USB drive. This contains everything. Financial records, communication intercepts, names of everyone involved in protecting terrorist financing operations. If something happens to me, get it to Congressman David Walsh, House Intelligence Committee. He's not compromised. The roof provided temporary refuge, but no escape routes, just elevated positions that would make us easier targets for sniper teams that were probably being positioned around the building. We were trapped with nowhere to run and evidence that powerful people were willing to kill to suppress. Kane, do you really believe that protecting terrorist financing operations serves American interests? Jessica asked, while scanning the surrounding area for potential backup or escape options. Kane was quiet for a long moment while monitoring the tactical team's approach through the building below us. I believe that sometimes protecting America requires choices that don't feel good to the people making them. And I believe that protecting America requires exposing corruption even when it threatens operations that provide short-term intelligence advantages, Jessica replied while preparing for what appeared to be final confrontation. The tactical team reached the roof with professional coordination that left us no opportunity for effective resistance. Special Agent Thompson was leading the assault, wearing body armor that identified him as FBI counterterrorism rather than local law enforcement. Agent Lawson, this ends here, Thompson said, while his team established control over our positions. The evidence you've gathered will be reviewed through proper channels by people with appropriate security clearances. What proper channels? Jessica demanded, while the tactical team confiscated her weapons and equipment. The same agencies that have been protecting terrorist financing operations for 3 years? Thompson gestured toward Kane with recognition that suggested they'd worked together before. Detective Kane, thank you for your assistance in this operation. Your cooperation will be noted in your service record. Kane looked at Jessica and me with expression that might have been regret or professional satisfaction. Agent Lawson, I'm sorry this situation became necessary, but national security requires difficult choices. What difficult choices? I asked, though I was beginning to understand Kane's role in whatever had been planned for tonight. The choice to eliminate a federal agent whose evidence would shut down our most valuable source of intelligence about terrorist activities, Kane replied, while the tactical team prepared Jessica for transport to wherever they planned to eliminate her. But Jessica had one more surprise. The emergency communication equipment she'd been using had been recording everything for the past hour, automatically uploading to cloud storage that was accessible to congressional oversight committees and international law enforcement agencies. Thompson, Kane, everyone involved in this operation, Jessica said, while being restrained by the tactical team. Your conversations tonight have been recorded and transmitted to multiple agencies. If I disappear, everyone will know exactly who was responsible. Thompson's expression showed alarm rather than anger. Agent Lawson, what agencies received your transmissions? House Intelligence Committee, Senate Judiciary Committee, Interpol, and several international human rights organizations, Jessica replied with satisfaction. My death tonight becomes an international incident rather than a domestic counterterrorism operation. Kane was already coordinating with the tactical team for immediate extraction, probably to locations where they could develop responses to the political complications Jessica had created. Thompson, how do we contain the damage from her unauthorized communications? We don't, Thompson replied, while studying the political implications of eliminating a federal agent whose evidence was already in the hands of congressional oversight committees. We adapt the operation to account for increased scrutiny. What happened next surprised everyone. Federal helicopters arrived with legitimate backup from agencies that hadn't been compromised by the terrorist financing operation. The cavalry that Jessica had been hoping for throughout the night. Special Agent Diana Foster from FBI Internal Affairs landed with tactical teams that immediately took Thompson and Kane into custody for questioning about their involvement in operations to eliminate federal witnesses. Legitimate law enforcement finally arriving after hours of betrayal and manipulation. Agent Lawson, this is Foster, FBI Internal Affairs, Diana announced, while her team secured the scene. We've been investigating corruption in counterterrorism operations for 8 months. Your evidence and tonight's recordings provide everything we need for prosecutions. Jessica's relief was visible and overwhelming. Agent Foster, how did you know to find us here? Because we've been monitoring communications from the corrupt counterterrorism operation for weeks, Foster replied, while coordinating medical treatment and evidence preservation. Agent Lawson, your evidence documents the largest corruption scandal in federal law enforcement history. I was finally able to sit down and process what had happened over the past 6 hours. Random coffee shop visit that became kidnapping, federal witness protection, terrorist financing operations, corrupted counterterrorism agencies, and finally legitimate federal backup that restored some faith in American law enforcement. What happens now? I asked, while paramedics checked everyone for injuries and federal agents processed evidence from the night's operation. Now, we prosecute everyone involved in protecting terrorist financing, Agent Foster replied, while reviewing Jessica's evidence on multiple devices. Thompson, Kane, Deputy Director Sterling, probably dozens of other federal agents who prioritized intelligence gathering over preventing terrorism financing. The investigation that followed revealed the scope of corruption. Federal agencies had been allowing terrorist financing operations to continue for years, while claiming the intelligence value justified protecting criminal activities that funded attacks against American targets. Jessica's evidence resulted in congressional hearings that exposed systematic corruption throughout counterterrorism agencies, leading to reforms that prioritized preventing terrorist financing over gathering intelligence through criminal collaboration. Justice served, even though it took destroying careers and operations to achieve it. Kane received 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder of federal agents and obstruction of justice. Thompson received life without parole for the same charges, plus treason for protecting terrorist financing operations. I returned to my normal life with new understanding of how thin the line could be between legitimate law enforcement and criminal collaboration disguised as national security operations. Sometimes doing the right thing required destroying the very agencies that were supposed to protect American interests. 6 months later, Jessica visited me to thank me for helping save her life and expose the corruption that had nearly gotten her killed. She was working for a new federal task force dedicated to investigating corruption in law enforcement agencies, using the skills she'd developed during 18 months of undercover work. Would you be interested in helping other people who find themselves trapped by corrupted law enforcement? She asked during our coffee shop meeting, conducted at a different location with better security than Brew and Bean. I accepted her offer, becoming part of a civilian network that provided assistance to federal agents and witnesses who were threatened by the very agencies that were supposed to protect them. Sometimes the best way to serve justice was working outside official channels to expose corruption within them. 2 years later, we were still investigating federal corruption and protecting witnesses whose evidence threatened powerful interests. The work was dangerous and often thankless, but it was also necessary for maintaining the integrity of American law enforcement and national security operations. The drive-thru worker who had started it all by warning me about Jessica in my back seat turned out to be Agent Foster in disguise, conducting surveillance of Romano's operations while coordinating with legitimate federal agencies to expose the corruption that protected terrorist financing. Sometimes the most important battles for American security were fought not against foreign enemies, but against domestic corruption that weakened the very agencies responsible for protecting innocent people from terrorism, crime, and betrayal by their own government.